Remember, remember, the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I know of no reason the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. This is the Geek Cabal channel. My name is Bobbie, and today we're going to be talking about V for Vendetta, the movie, but we'll talk a little bit about the book too. Now, if you're watching, if I get this edited in time and everything, and you're seeing this the day I release it, it will be the 5th of November. This was not a coincidence, it was intentional. It also happens to be in the United States in 2024, the election day.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
You can choose to read into that anything that you will. So, here we go. V for Vendetta. So this is an adaptation of an Alan Moore comic book. The comic was written in the 80s. And the movie was made in the mid-2000s by the Wachowski siblings, the duo who brought us the Matrix movies. And very similar to the Matrix, there's a very big anti-establishment streak in this. Like, it's kind of the whole point. But before we get going a little bit, our two main characters are Evie Hammond, who's played by Natalie Portman, and V, whose identity we never discover, which is part of the point, which I'm going to talk about how the movie kind of screws that up just a little bit. And it's played by Hugo Weaving. I don't know in terms of physicality if it was him on set the whole time with the mask or how exactly they did that, but you never actually see his face. But you can tell by his voice that it is indeed Hugo Weaving. Also of Matrix fame as Agent Smith. And several other things, like he played, Elrond in Lord of the Rings and numerous other roles. I suppose I should mention that Natalie Portman was also Princess Amidala, or Queen Amidala, in the prequel trilogy for Star Wars. So she would be Luke and Leia's mother. So, yeah, it is, other characters, like Stephen Fry plays a TV show host, and there's a number of other people. John Hurt, I believe. I really hope that's his name. He is Chancellor Sutler, the guy who rules England, and you probably recognize him from Alien. He's Kane, the guy who gets face-huggered and chest-busted. Obviously, he's in all kinds of other things. That movie came out in the 70s, so it'd be, he has a lengthy resume, well-known actor. And unfortunately, I've seen this police officer somewhere else, but I don't know his name, unfortunately. He's another British actor. So, anyway, what's it all about? Well, the little ditty from the beginning of the video here talks about an attempt by a man named Guy Fawkes in the 1600s to destroy the House of Parliament in England when the gunpowder treason. Obviously, I was going to assume, based on that he intended on using a whole lot of gunpowder to destroy the House of Parliament. He failed and was executed. But his visage is used in what they call a Guy Fawkes mask. Fawkes for his last name. You probably also know it as the visage that the folks from Anonymous like to use, or they use a variation of it anyway. So, it's interesting that V chooses this visage because, while it does have a cultural significance to England, and Alan Moore, being English, would have far more knowledge of this than us colonials over here, but Guy Fawkes was, as I understand it, he was mad that the government wasn't strict and religious enough and the kind of the opposite of what V is going for here. So I don't know, interesting take. So yeah, so essentially Evie Hammond is a woman who, in the movie, and I'll talk about some discrepancies between the movie and the book towards the end here. She works for the TV station, because England at this point, I believe this is supposed to take place in 2020. I think that's where the movie's supposed to take place, which would be, 10, 15 years after it was released. And supposedly what has happened is the United States has basically plunged into, it wasn't civil war, but our adventurism in the Middle East got wildly out of hand and eventually sucked in other countries like England, who had to deal with a bunch of terrorist activities and things like this. And in response, elected a ultra-religious conservative government into place and created the new position of High Chancellor, and that's Adam Sutler, John Hurt's character. And it's a totalitarian regime that curtails freedoms more so than the actual British government. So the people are not exactly fans of this, but also it's one of those, well, times was tough. These people proposed a solution, and we haven't been attacked since then, so I guess we'll just put up with it. And then along comes V, who intends on overthrowing the government. And I mean, that's the extent of his plan. He doesn't plan on being around for the after effect. He's going to leave it to the people to try to chart their own course and hopefully make some better decisions. And throughout the whole movie, he wears a Guy Fawkes mask, so you never see him, you never know what his identity is or anything at all like that. That's a little bit a bigger plot point in the book, but again, I'll talk about that. So he, in the opening of the movie, saves Evie from some of the secret police who intend on having their way with her because they found her out after curfew, and he beats them pretty good. Then the two of them go and watch the Old Bailey be destroyed because he has rigged it to explode on the 5th of November. It was midnight, November 4th. The bells chime, November 5th. This music kicks up. Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, I believe. And so it draws the people out, and, so they see the building explode. And then you get to see the fake news kick in, because it is literally just government propaganda. And talks about, you get to see how they spin it of, it was a last minute demolition, and the demolition crew decided to have a little fun and put some fireworks in there. And, no one believes it. But that's not the point of propaganda anyway. So, for those of you that don't know, it's not so much to get you to believe it, it's to prove who has power over you. Because if they can tell just such brazen lies, and you can't do anything about it, they know they're lying, you know they're lying, they know that you know they're lying, they know that you know that they know, and they know there's not a damn thing you can do about it. It's a demoralization tactic. It's not to get you actually believing that crap. Because people don't. I mean, there's all kinds of people from the former Soviet Union that have interviewed that are like, no one believed that. That's Stalin crap. But you had to know it, because if you didn't, you could be shot. So, so that's the point of propaganda. And so you see that here. You see literally people concocting what stories they're going to tell and everything in a war room kind of setting, with Chancellor Sutler as a giant, head on a big video screen, and talking to the various people, the head of security, the secret police, police officer there in London, the guy who controls the media and all that stuff. So as the movie progresses, Evie's identified, so she becomes a wanted person because she's standing there with V as he blows up one of the main buildings there in London. And he helps her escape, but he is beginning to hunt down and kill certain people. And it's not until later in the movie that you find out what their significance is, because initially it seems like they're just public officials. And there's more to it than that. So, and I'll get to that here in a second. So, things go forward, and he attempts to destroy the main broadcast center for the main propaganda channel. Now, here, I'm going to mention this here so I don't forget it later. In the movie, they disarm the device. In the book, they do not. The building is destroyed. And the gentleman who is in charge of all that gets killed in the explosion. And that's an important plot point in the book, which, again, I'll explain most of that here in a minute. So, goes forward a little bit. V won't let her leave because she's seen where he's hiding, and he's like, well, you know that we're underground, you know these things, like, a clever man could potentially put all that together and figure out where I am. So, I really can't let you go. And then you find out that, like, her parents and her brother, her brother was killed in an attack, and her parents got, very political after that, and then they got disappeared. And so, she looks like she's the perfect person to be with V, even though she would just stumbled across him. So he tries to use her to lure one of the other people he's after, but she's like trying to warn him, like, hey, like, V's coming to kill you, dude. We got to get out of here. And she's like, I want protection. Like, I had no part of this, not on me here. Like, I'm trying to warn you. I'm going to show you I'm on your side. Like, save me. He's coming. And the guy's like, oh, well, this is such a wonderful game, because he's an individual who thinks that she's there for sexual reasons, because, he thinks she's a call girl. And it's heavily implied that he prefers younger girls. Like, kind of sounds like really younger girls. And, yeah. So, then V shows up and kills him. But she escapes and goes to the home of a gentleman who's on the news network, Stephen Fry's character, who hosts like a talk show. And she had, in fact, at the beginning of the movie, she'd been going to his place, and that's when she got, caught up in everything. So she goes to hide there, and he shows her that he's got all kinds of illicit materials that he's collecting. Like, he has a copy of a painting called God Save the Queen, which has Chancellor Adam Sutler looking like he's Queen Elizabeth II. And she's like, I thought they had this destroyed. And he's like, Chancellor Sutler thinks that too. It cost me a lot of money to get this. And there's also a Quran. And she's like, well, you're not a Muslim. He's like, well, I don't have to be a Muslim to appreciate, the penmanship, the beautiful images and everything. And then she also sees some pictures where she realizes that he's gay. And she's kind of like, so why'd you invite me over? He's like, well, like, the current government doesn't like people like me either. And so I have to keep up appearances to make it look like I prefer women. And so that means that I would invite a beautiful girl like yourself who works with me over to my house. And, we'd have a few drinks, have a few laughs, and it just wouldn't work out. He's like, that's how he has to hide the fact that he's gay, because the government there literally does abduct and kill people like that. So, as we find out later. And so then, of course, they produce an episode where he makes the Chancellor look like a complete buffoon. This proved to be a fatal mistake for his character. He gets taken, and you find out later, whenever V explains to Evie what happened, he's like, well, I thought they would have just arrested him, and then they found the Quran, so then they executed him. Because that's the way this government rolls. It is a tyrannical hellhole. So, Evie escapes, she gets captured, she gets tortured, and ultimately is faced with the fact that she's going to be executed. And then she finds out it was all fake. V did all that to her himself. So she is understandably quite nonplussed at this. And That's where some real acting comes out right there from her and Hugo Weaving. And he's trying to, explain to her, like, look, you genuinely thought you were going to be killed, and you accepted it. You moved past it. You're no longer, there's nothing can harm you now. You are truly free. There's nothing you fear anymore. And he's not wrong. It's just that, to get there, he had to be a monster, and that's what she point blank tells him, because he's like, well, they made me. He's like, what was done to me was monstrous. And she's like, and they created a monster, which is true, And so she goes and she's able to just blend in because no one recognizes her, because of her new outlook and everything, and the fact her head's been shaved. She promises to come back and, before November 5th, because he has promised to destroy the House of Parliament, and basically has invited everyone to join the revolution. So while all this is happening, you also have a detective trying to figure out who V is, what his goal is, and everything else. And so he is trying to figure out what the connection is between all the people that are being killed. And he eventually realizes that they were all used to work at a government camp where they took the undesirables, and that all of them seem to have made a whole lot of money and have now all gained positions of power, which means that some evil shit went down and they're all being bought, or were 100% behind it. And the only person that they can't identify is a doctor at the camp, who they eventually realize is the coroner there at the police department. And by the time they get to her, V has already killed her. But he comes to her, and while she's asleep, she wakes up, knows that he's there, and she's like, I wasn't sure it was you until I saw one of your roses, because he's left scarlet carsons, which I'm given to understand is a type of rose. And she says that they are thought to be extinct, and he's been growing them, and it ties into the stuff with the camp. So he says, yeah, it's me. And she's like, so have you come to kill me? And he's like, oh, I killed you 10 minutes ago while you're in your sleep. And he holds up a needle. She's like, is it painless? And he's like, yes. And she's like, is it too late to apologize? He's like, never. So she apologizes, and she dies. And she had gotten her notebook out of a safe and left it out on the nightstand, and it's a notebook of everything that happened at the camp. They used the people as to experiment on, and from them developed a bioweapon. So a little bit later in the movie, the police inspector finds what he believes to be one of the early intel people. The others have been killed, and he assumes this is a guy that probably knows some stuff. So he goes to meet him, and it's actually V in disguise, as you find out. But he spins a tale because he's like, well, no, Inspector, you don't want the facts. You have the facts. What you want is the story. And he lays it all out for him. And essentially, they used the people at the camp to develop a bioweapon. And then Creedy, the head of the intel agency, essentially recommended, let's not use it against our enemies. Let's use it against our own people. So that in the panic, they will give us absolute power to take control of everything. So, yeah. That's not at all relevant to any recent events or anything. But, yeah, so that's what happened. And Chancellor Sutler is the guy in charge. One big time in Parliament, and all of them got rich because, along with the weapon, they also made the cure. And they all are huge shareholders in the company that makes the cure. So, that's what happened. And now, V is killing the people at the camp that made this all happen. That's where his enemies list has come from. And the coup de grace is going to be to overthrow the government. So, it comes down to that. He convinces Creedy that Settler is about to turn against him, and he's like, "You're a smart man. You're in charge of security. You knew one day it might come down to you or him. That's why, for security reasons, you've kept him underground. And naturally, the guys around him are loyal to you." He's like, "So you knew this day would come. Time to decide." And so Settler is going to address the country because it's getting close. You know, it gets to November 5th or November 4th, and all the guys there in the meeting room are really kind of strung out, like, well, we still haven't caught him, and like, we need to address the possibility that he actually destroys Parliament. And that's where Settler makes his fatal mistake of saying, the only thing that's going to change is tomorrow, instead of reading the paper, I'm going to be reading Mr. Creedy's resignation if that happens. That's when Creedy's like, yeah, well, decision made. So there's a pretty interesting sequence from where the police officer is talking to his his subordinate that's with him through all this, and telling him, you know, that he went out to where one of these terrorist attacks was, where the bioweapon was released. And he's like, I sat there and I felt like I could see it all laid out. What had happened, what's happening, what's going to happen. And he's like, it just felt like it was all together and connected. And this ties into a scene from the comic that they weren't going to actually replicate in the movie, but it's there. So this is here in spirit. So the subordinate's like, well, so what's going to happen? He's like, well, I don't know what's going to happen. It was just a feeling, but I can guess. And he lays out this chain of events because V has sent Guy Fawkes masks to everyone in London. And so you see a girl from earlier in the movie. She's got one. She's spray painting graffiti over one of the government signs to make the V symbol, which is a circle with the V through it. And one of the secret police folks shoots her and kills her. And then you see an angry mob form up around him and probably beat him to death. And then that starts the ball rolling. And he's like, and then Settler's going to do the only thing he knows how to do. He's going to call in the military. And so they all show up and start protecting various parts of London. But you got the massive crowds. So it's an inevitable confrontation. And he's like, all V has to do is keep his word, and it's going to be total anarchy. So comes down to that, and Evie tries to convince him not to do it, not to go, because he has to go confront Settler and Creedy. And he tells her the plan, as far as he's got a train loaded full of explosives that are going to take out the Parliament building, and because they shut down the subway system, because that's where one of the attacks was, and he's had to like basically clean out the tunnel and lay some track and everything to get it ready. But he has to go do this, and Evie tries to convince him not to, and he's like, no, Evie, he's like, I have a destiny here, like, I have to confront my maker. He's like, I'm leaving the choice to you. Like, I won't be here to see this new world. He's like, I'm destroying the old one. Like, it is up to people like you, new people, to create a new world. And I'm leaving this choice to you. So he leaves. She sits there debating. He goes, and Creedy has Settler. Creedy shoots him. And then it's obvious V is not going to go quietly. And so where one of the better exchanges in the movie happens.
We have guns.
So what do you have are bullets, and the hope that when your guns are empty, I'm no longer standing, because if I am, you'll all be dead before you've reloaded.
And that's what happens. Everyone takes their best shot, and then he kills them all, with Creedy being the last one. And then and he gives him his basically tells him that that yes, there's a person behind this mask, but what's behind this mask is ideas, and ideas are bulletproof.
Beneath this mask there is an idea, Mr. Creedy. Ideas are bulletproof.
Because Creedy's just unloading into him, and he's like, why won't you fall? And it's not so much that he's bulletproof, he was bullet resistant. So he makes his way back to where Evie is, and he's bleeding out because he's been shot several times, obviously. And she's like, you don't die on me. And he's like, oh, that's probably the nicest thing you could have ever said to me. So then she puts him on board the train, surrounded by a bunch of his roses. And then the cop shows up to stop her. And by this point, tens of thousands of people have filled the street. And the military can't get a hold of anyone in high command, so they all stand down because none of them want to be responsible for a massacre. So everyone gets around the Parliament building, and then the clock strikes 12, and the cop tries to stop her, and she's like, no. It's like, this is going to happen. And you know that she means it as in, like, shoot me if you have to, but I'm throwing this switch. And so then she does, and you see all the devices arm, and the train goes, and then the music starts blaring, and it's the Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture. The train gets to where it's going, and kaboom, takes out the House of Parliament. Then you see out in the crowd, everyone starts taking off their masks, and you see the various people that have been killed throughout the movie. And this is where the cop asks her who he was, and she's like, she goes through a list of names. She's like, it was Edmond Dantes. She's like, she's my mother, my father. He was you. He was me. He was all of us. And somewhere in there she talks about, the man. But the whole point was he could have been anyone. This is one of the parts of the movie kind of fumbles, in my opinion. Because it's supposed to be the whole, like, yes, there's a man behind there, but but who he was is unimportant. What's important is the symbol. It's like with Batman Begins, where he's talking about, as a man I can do so much, but as a symbol, I can be many things to many people. I can be incorruptible, immortal. And so that's kind of what V was going for here. And that's where the movie ends. So, and like the book doesn't, it ends with who knows what's going to happen now. So, overall, it's an excellent movie. It is Americanized, because here's where we're going to start talking about the differences. In the book, there's not a whole lot left of America, because the United States and the Soviet Union finally went and had it out in an all-out nuclear attack on each other. Now, even in the foreword of the copy of the book I have, Alan Moore acknowledges that he totally underestimated how devastating that would be. And there probably wouldn't be an England left either, even though England disarmed and tried to make themselves not a target. One, they still would have been a target, but two, the literal and figurative fallout would have destroyed them anyway. So he acknowledges that, but what happened as a result is the seasons got all screwy. Think nuclear winter, basically. So England had to seal itself off from the rest of the world. So the movie presents a scenario where the government intentionally engineered the crisis, whereas the book has it that nothing England did brought this on, but the whole world fell into anarchy, and the choice was anarchy or fascism. And that's kind of the question the book asks, like, is safety and security in the face of complete anarchy worth that? Was that a worthwhile choice, given the alternative? There's no easy answers. I mean, obviously, we see which way more follows because the government is overthrown at the end. But, you're presented with a scenario where the alternative wasn't great either. So, in the book, there is a computer that they use to control things within the country. And there's bits and pieces of the movie that seem like they were written with that idea in mind, but they don't follow through with it. And in the book, you find out eventually that V has access to it. And that's how he knows what's happening, how he knows what the government's going to do and everything else. So, let's see. So Evie in the book is a prostitute and not someone that works for the news agency. I can understand why they decided to change that a little bit for the movie. Then in the book, she suspects that V is her father. because again, he's missing, and he says a lot of the same things her dad did. And there comes a point where he point blank tells her, like, Evie, I'm not your father, and then like disappears. Okay, so I mentioned the TV station deal. In the book, it gets blown up, and the guy who was in charge of it gets blown up with it. Well, his wife is like kicked out of her house because she doesn't have money anymore. The people in the party are just kind of like, well, you know, we really only cared about you because you're your husband, so hit the bricks, lady. So she goes through some things, and by the end of the book, some horrific things have happened to her, if I recall correctly. So by the end of the book, she's at the rally where the chancellor is going to go address the nation in person. And he sees her in the crowd and recognizes her because she was a party member. And he's like, hey, wait, you were so-and-so's wife. Like, come on. And brings her along. Then she whips out a gun and shoots him. And so that's how Chancellor Sutler dies in the book. Yeah. Then V is actually killed by the cop in the book. He's the one that shoots him. And then that whole, like, where he goes out and has kind of like the vision thing. Well, in the book, he goes out and does a little, does some psychotropic or another. I don't remember exactly which one. And trips out for a while, has some visions, and then decides, well, I got to go kill V, I guess. So yeah, there's some definite differences in the book. It's definitely worth reading, in my opinion. I still think Watchmen's the superior book. And definitely, again, also has a very big, like, anti-authoritarian streak to it. So, in the end of the book, the officer's like, no, this is just anarchy now, because the government does get overthrown, and, like, things just go wild in the streets. It's rioting everywhere, and, you know, oh well, people will figure it out, I guess. So Evie addresses the crowd dressed as V, because he's dead. And after the destruction of Parliament, but I don't recall. And then she takes the cops, like, his underling. She takes him in as, like, her understudy now to be V later on if anything ever happens to her. And yeah, also as he's dying, I don't remember if he says it as he's dying or if she says, you know, that he said it. But whenever you see his body there on the train in the book, you know, you see the quote, you know, he said to her at some point, give me a Viking funeral. Well, the funerals were pretty fiery. That's why she put him on the train. And so, yeah, like I said, the book's definitely worth checking out. If you see the movie and you like it, definitely check the book out. If you read the book first, you might have some issues with the movie because it's not a straight up adaptation. It definitely changes things, definitely Americanizes it, and even though it still takes place in England, I think overall it conveyed a lot of the same thoughts and aspects, but it did other things, and some things you might have a different appreciation on here in 2024. Let you folks figure out anything I may or may not be alluding to there, but yeah. So, again, if you're watching this on the day it's going out, it is November 5th. It is Election Day. If you haven't done so, go vote. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. That's up to you. I just wish more people would vote. But, yeah. So, that's about all I've got to say on this movie. Like I said, I think it's an excellent movie. And it's definitely one of my favorite comic book adaptations, even though it's not a perfect adaptation. My favorite's still Watchmen. But because it, similar to V, it tries to be more than just a comic book. You know, at least the adaptation tries to be more than just a comic book movie also. So, and only there it actually has the trappings of a comic book. That's one of the reasons why I put it higher. V for Vendetta happens to be a story told in comic book form. Watchmen's a story that could only make sense as a comic book because it talks about comic books, if that makes sense. So anyway, yeah, just some stuff to think about. You know, it's one of the more thought-provoking comic book movies out there. Actually, there aren't very many that are thought-provoking, to be totally honest, in my opinion. It's basically those two and probably like The Winter Soldier. I would put up there. Some of the sentiment in Age of Ultron. Man, you know, that kind of bleeds over into Infinity War and Endgame, as far as, you know, like how far to go for security and things like that. But that's one of the reasons why The Winter Soldier is probably my favorite of the MCU movies besides Infinity War and Endgame. You know, because there's some things to think about from that movie. So, anyway, hope you folks enjoyed this little walk down memory lane through V for Vendetta. Hope you go out and vote if you haven't already. And if you see this afterwards, well, I hope you did vote. If you're in another country, well, I hope you enjoyed the video. Obviously, I hope you didn't vote in our election. No offense. But, yeah. So, anyway, that's all I've got to say. Let me know down in the comments. Have you seen the movie before? Do you like the movie? Dislike the movie? Have you read the book? Have you done one or the other, but not the other one? Are you going to contemplate doing the other one now? You know, any of that kind of stuff, let me know. But like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Sharing and commenting are the best ways to help us grow the channel, and it's always appreciated. But yeah, other than that, just
Remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder, treason, and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgotten.